How's it going, Giants fans? My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. And today we want to discuss one big reason the Giants are headed in the right direction, or at least we think they are. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years in terms of how not to run things, with Joe Judge's disciplinary ways, Dave Gettleman's ways in general. There's been a lot to hate, a lot not to like, and Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll seemingly have a different approach to things. It seems to be a little bit more family oriented, a lot more analytically driven, modern concepts in terms of just the way they're drafting, the positions they're allocating assets to. And so far, I've been quite impressed with some of the things they've done specifically on the offensive line. But if there's any way to really start a rebuild, really fuel a rebuild, it's to invest draft capital at positions that traditionally cost a lot of money, right? Offensive tackle, quarterback, edge rusher. These are a couple of positions that normally in free agency, we've seen the Giants overspend on, $70 million contracts for Kenny Golladay, and wide receiver is another expensive one that's getting even more expensive these days. Big contract on Nate Solder, Leonard Williams. There's a lot of these guys that have been paid astronomical money, and the team has still lost a lot of games because the drafting has been poor. Now, it seems to me that we've really gotten a couple of really good players in terms of Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau. And obviously, these guys have the talents to be phenomenal athletes and players down the road with the proper coaching. But I'm excited to kind of break down exactly why this team is headed in the right direction, at least why we believe they are, based on the moves that Shane and Daboll have made so far this offseason, Anthony. But before we dive into it, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, and I'm always down to talk about this Giants rebuild because I've been super impressed with it so far. I love what Joe Schoen has done. I think he's done a phenomenal job getting value players. We've talked about that a lot, especially in free agency, not spending big. The Giants did not have a lot of salary cap space this offseason. However, they still found a couple of very solid starters, one of which was, of course, Mark Lewinsky at right guard. A very solid starter for a cheap contract. That was a great move there. And then, of course, the way that the Giants attacked the 2022 NFL draft, I think we're all super happy with the way that the draft went. Of course, with the first two picks in that first round, everyone's excited. Edge rusher is a premier position. It's an expensive position as well. And they got Kayvon Thibodeau with the 5th overall pick. And offensive tackle, another premier expensive position. Evan Neal, arguably the best player in the draft, regardless of position, was Evan Neal. So you're looking at what the Giants have done this offseason. It is impressive. It's been value and it's been modern. And that always excites me.
Yeah, I mean, look, they have really turned the table here on what we're used to. What are we used to? We're used to drafting guys that contribute nothing, and we're used to spending a lot of money in free agency and kicking the can down the road to supplement those decisions, right? Last year's draft class actually wasn't that bad. I actually think that Joe Judge, of all things he did right, of the things well, I guess the minimal things he did right. There's not that many things, but one of them was I didn't think he was the worst drafter. I thought the Giants had a pretty decent draft last year. Azeez Ojulari is going to be a great player for this team. Andrew Thomas is a great player for this team. I think Aaron Robinson is going to be a legitimate starter at cornerback, or at least he'll be transitioned back to a nickel role as a worst case scenario. The fact they got so much value out of Tate Crowder as Mr. Irrelevant is quite insane to me. Overall, I mean, look at Xavier McKinney, another guy who had a tremendous season last year. Really good player. So there are some guys that they did land that have contributed significantly. Now, before Joe Judge, we're looking at the O'Shane Ximenez's of the world. We're looking at the Daniel Joneses of the world. Looking at the Saquon Barkley's, just like really some good talent, but they haven't been able to live up to their potential. Now, I think coaching has a lot more to do with player success than their individual talent at times. You can go look at the New England Patriots as a good example of that, right? You don't need to have the best talented players to win football games. You just have to have the guys that have specific skill sets execute perfectly, right? Execution is everything. You could have the best player in the league, but if they're in a scheme that doesn't promote like proper discipline, proper execution, and doing that well every time, you're gonna lose games. That's what it is at the end of the day. Like last year, look at Jason Garrett's offense. Kenny Golladay is a number one receiver. He was in Detroit. Detroit is an awful team, but he was a monster in Detroit, and somehow the Giants managed to get not even a single touchdown out of him. The fact our left tackle had more touchdowns than him last year is just another indication of why this entire coaching staff needed to be overhauled. But I will say this, back to like the rebuilding portion of this, I think the Giants did something very, very smart. And they invested draft capital at edge rusher and offensive tackle. Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau fifth and seventh overall picks, you have 5 years of cost controlled play of those two players. You know what I mean? That value is astronomical. You have Andrew Thomas for another 3 seasons before you have to make a decision on his long-term future. You have Azeez Ojulari for another 3 seasons before you have to make a decision on his future. And that value right there of having cost-controlled players, given the coaching staff can elevate them to be, to reach their potential, 4 players at the most expensive positions in football, aside from quarterback, are all cost-controlled. People talk about the rookie window. How about the offensive tackle and edge rusher window? I think that's an underrated perspective that people might not be looking at and saying, this rebuild, yes, like Andrew Thomas was like a Dave Gettleman pick. Azeez Ojulari was as well. But the Giants spent those first round picks this year on 2 of the most expensive positions in football. And I think that, yes, most GMs would have made those decisions if they were available. But I think it indicates that the direction we're going is the right one in terms of rebuilding. Now it comes down to the quarterback position, Anthony. Like, that's going to be the next question. How many assets is it gonna take for us to land a quarterback in next year's draft? But how important do you think it is to have those bookend tackles and really high end edge rushers, or at least the potential is there for them to be high end on cost controlled contracts?
Well, I think it's super crucial because you take a look at, and I'm on Spot Rack right now, and I'm looking at average salary. Now, the average salary for a player on offense is $2.47 million. For quarterbacks, it's 5.3. So that's a significant jump right there. But let's take a look at offensive line. For offensive linemen, you're talking 2.4 million, and tackles, left tackles, 6.4 million average salaries for left tackles, and 4 million average salaries for right tackles, compared to just 2.46 on the offensive line. So clearly there's far more value being placed at the tackle positions. It's a much more expensive position. And thankfully, Dave Gettleman did leave us with a cost-controlled contract in Andrew Thomas, a very solid young left tackle. But now we also have a very solid young right tackle. So, like I said, average salary for right tackle is almost double that of any other average offensive lineman. And then you take a look at the defensive line, and you take a look at the edge rusher position. Now, the average contract for a defender is 2.4 million, and you're talking 2.9 million for edge rushers. So when you're looking at averages, that's also significantly more expensive. Outside linebacker, specifically a 3-4 edge rusher, 3.4 million average contract at that position. And that's the position, of course, that Kayvon Thibodeau plays. So when you're looking at, second salaries, especially second contracts specifically, Andrew Thomas one day is going to get a second contract with the Giants. Whatever he's making now, it's probably around 5 or 6 or 7. It's going to double at least. Evan Neal's contract is going to double at least. If the Giants wanted to go into free agency and get an edge rusher with really solid impact, somebody that they think could get over 10 sacks per season, they are paying probably double, if not triple, what they're paying for Kayvon Thibodeau right now. And Kayvon Thibodeau has the ability to get you 10 sacks in a season for a third of the price of a veteran who gets you 10 sacks. So that's what's super important about the way that the Giants have built this roster. Being smart with their spending, leaving themselves with the ability to spend money elsewhere. They could spend money in free agency now. Let's say Kayvon Thibodeau goes for 10 sacks this season, and Azeez Ojulari maybe doesn't have the best year, and they decide, you know what, we want 2 10 sacks guaranteed guys. Well, now we have the money that we're not spending on Thibodeau to go out there and spend a 3-year contract, a ton of money on a premier edge rusher, and then when his contract expires, then we just use the money that we're no longer spending on him to pay Kayvon Thibodeau. The Giants have that flexibility now, and that is super important. They didn't have that flexibility in the past. You're talking about those really important positions like right tackle, like left tackle. In the past, they were overpaying to get players at those positions like Nate Solder. Nate Solder's contract, he was always going to be just average, but because he played one of the most expensive positions in football, his average contract was a record-breaking contract for a left tackle. And that's the problem with spending in free agency versus allocating your premier positions through the draft. That's what the Giants are doing now. They're getting those premier positions, those expensive positions on cost-controlled contracts through the draft, and you love to see it. It's going to be huge for the Giants in the long run.
Yeah, I really do think that makes a lot of sense. And the average contracts, I would love to see what the average contract is per position on a starting basis, like among just starters and not depth players as well, because then those numbers skyrocket probably astronomically, if we're being real. So looking at like what these guys are making right now, you look at, Andrew Thomas has an $8.8 million cap hit this year. Kayvon Thibodeau has a $5.7 million cap hit this year. My favorite is Azeez Ojulari, who only is making 1.5 million this year. I think he could be better than Kayvon in his rookie season. So this is pretty exciting stuff in terms of the health of the Giants' salary. And then you look at like 2023, they have Leonard Williams on the books at a $27.3 million cap hit this year. But next year, Leonard Williams, $26.3 million cap hit. But if they cut him, they can save $18 million. And this is the cops going by because they're trying to get that money. The Brinks truck, Leonard Williams just stole the Brinks truck. He's riding down the highway. They got to get the money back. $18 million they can save next year by releasing Leonard Williams. Is it a good idea? I'm not entirely sure. But the Giants do have I think about $55 million to spend next year, even if they keep Leonard Williams, right? So if they release him, 55 plus $18 million, you have a lot of money available to do things, to make moves, to fill those gaps and those holes. If Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari end up becoming a premier edge rush duo, you can do a lot of things with that money, right? You can go out and get a cornerback and put Aaron Robinson back in the nickel if he struggles. You still have Xavier McKinney on his rookie contract. All these guys, a quarterback. Maybe you have a quarterback on a rookie contract. Maybe the Giants say, hey, you know what? We feel like our roster is one piece away from being competitive. Let's go and trade for a quarterback and give up, and we can pay that guy, whatever it might be. Like there are things that they can do. Good teams with the only missing piece being a quarterback, and they have the money to spend. What if Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to stay in Green Bay anymore? Like he's having a bad situation. Devontae Adams is left. He doesn't want to be there. He forces his way out. And the Giants say, oh, let's go trade for him. We have all the pieces. We got Kenny Galladay. We got I guess Saquon's going to be gone after this year unless they retain him on an extension. But you still got a lot of good pieces. Wan'Dale Kadarius. You got Daniel Bellinger coming up through the wings here. So, you never know. And Brian Dable has a lot of history, and Mike Kafka, they know how to build good offenses. So I'm excited to see where this team goes in terms of salary space and how they are able to capitalize on the windows of these rookies and these guys that are just not making a lot of money for the next 3 to 5 years, which is huge. And then if you add the rookie window for a quarterback on top of that, this team is going to have so much financial flexibility for the next 5 years. The window for opportunity, the window for rebuilding and making it to the playoffs and actually making a run, it increases exponentially. So it's just a matter of like who that quarterback is going to be. I think right now that's my biggest concern is like who is going to be that QB. I don't know if Daniel Jones can win a game in the playoffs. I really don't just yet. But maybe he shows us that he's capable of doing that with a new system and a better discipline and execution by everybody around him and a better offensive line. So I'm excited, Anthony. Any last thoughts on this topic specifically?
Listen, it's just exciting to me. I think, you kind of hit it there talking about veteran quarterbacks that the Giants could potentially trade for, right? Because you're taking a look at how the Giants salary cap is structured. And we did a video a couple weeks ago talking about how the Giants are listed as having like the third or top 3 healthiest salary cap space for the next 4 years in the NFL. And a lot of that is because of what they did this offseason to allocate those resources through the draft. And I think that's super exciting because, as you mentioned, let's imagine a scenario where, star quarterback, let's say another young guy has a breakout year and he wants out of whatever team he's on. Now the Giants have the salary cap space to go out there and get him and sign him to a big contract and get the future of their franchise solidified without having to just trade the farm to get the first overall pick in the draft and take a chance on a rookie. The Giants have the money and the capital to go after a proven starter and go ahead and pay them. And that's a big difference. Now, likelihood, they're probably going to end up drafting a quarterback next year, right? Even if Daniel Jones does have a good year, what are the odds that he really solidifies himself as a true franchise quarterback after 3-4 mediocre seasons, right? So you're probably not talking about giving him a second contract, but you could be talking about taking the money that you're saving on him by not picking up his 5th-year option and spending that on another established starter at the quarterback position. This is really a quarterback's game. The NFL football is a quarterback's game. They're super expensive starters in the NFL. You can have one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and you're still paying boatloads of money, probably $20 million a year just to get a bad starting offensive quarterback, right? So when you take a look at that, that's super important to note. So now that the Giants have some salary cap flexibility and some good draft allocation to these expensive positions, the quarterback position will be much easier to solve in the future.
Man, getting a good quarterback these days is not easy. Look like Seattle's rolling with, they just traded freaking Russell Wilson, and now they're forced to roll with Drew Lock. God help them. If I was DK Metcalf, I'd be so mad, just absolutely fuming, knowing that I just went from like one of the best quarterbacks in football to Drew Lock, who the Denver Broncos didn't even want, and Teddy Bridgewater's not even there anymore. I think he's with Miami now. So it's like it's actually insane. how difficult it is to find like top end quarterbacks. But if you get one, you do everything possible not to let him go, and you do everything possible to build around him. If you get one on a rookie contract, you've got to find a way to compete. Joey Burrow made it to the Super Bowl last year. I mean, you get a guy like that. Like Cincinnati's roster was not that good. You know what I mean? Like their offensive line was hot garbage. Jamar Chase was like, and you know, even Joe Mixon, solid players. But Joey Burrow, man, just did things that were just unbelievable. That defense, they made some nice plays, but they had Eli Apple in coverage, for goodness sake. It's unbelievable what they managed to accomplish. And a good quarterback goes a long way toward helping that. So hopefully the Giants can figure out that quarterback position over the next year, whether that be Daniel Jones if he comes back and has a tremendous season, or drafting a guy like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levi. There are options on the table here, so we're excited to see what the future holds, my friends. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. As always, we appreciate the love. As always, make sure to drop a comment below on your thoughts about the cap situation for this team. If you think this catalyst for success makes sense in terms of just investing in high cost positions with draft capitals, that way you can keep those contracts cost control, which is what Joe Shane says. And I tend to agree. But appreciate all the support, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.